And with that fantastic intro aside here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to a special presentation of Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. I am VashSky, your host right here, and, well, the amazing Lou Wasserman's Ghost is here to join me. Sir, thank you so much for joining me on another one.
Oh, Vash, you're always so nice, but whenever you say sir, I want to give you those sergeant lines from all the great war movies where they say, you don't sir me, I work for a living, but I don't. So maybe that's okay.
Yes,
Jack Webb and all those guys, had that line down.
That's a fair point. It's a fair point. Let's see here. What is StreamYard doing to me? Okay, there we go. Sorry, guys. This is a very special episode for a couple of reasons. One is we're going to do something really unique that we've never done before. I don't think that Park Place crew has ever done before. I've never seen it really done before in other live streams. Lou is, well, he's going on, I think he's going on a little bit of a vacay, a little bit of a holiday, as the British would say. And he is going to be gone next week. So, those of us who love Lou's contribution are trying to bank in a little bit of Lou for you, so that way you can get your Lou fix next week. And we'll be doing the same here with Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. But Lou had this incredible idea that hey, let's go ahead and bring in this live audience to that production. So we're going to be having an intermission at around the time that we end the show here. We're not going to go super long. I think we did 2 hours last time. We'll try to keep it around an hour or so, and then we'll carry you with us to the production of the next
Back to the
show.
Future.
Right? Yes. And we'll have a little bit of an intermission screen. That way, we can kind of get ourselves together right there.
The highly technical term in the motion picture industry is a pee break.
Yes.
Yes. I wouldn't expect all of you to understand that, but that's the words that we professionals use, so.
Right. Yeah. I think that is the technical term. So
yes.
We'll be engaging in that while we kind of reset there, and we'll take you along for the ride. Now, if we do get any super chats or anything during that time, we'll go ahead and acknowledge them for sure, like we always do. You just might be cut out of the edit. Now, if you have a question, we'll just take it there. And there you go. I think that'll be that'll be very, very good. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. But I think you guys have heard. I don't know if. Well, maybe you guys haven't heard. Universal over there doing some fantastic work over there in their Florida resort with the expansions and so forth and all that. But they're building a new theme park, right? It's going to be one of the largest destinations in Florida when it opens. And it will feature 5 themed lands. One kind of central area, but then 4 distinctly themed lands around there. And you can kind of see that they actually debuted one of those lands to the public on June 20th. And you can kind of see that right here. It is Dark Universe. And I was thinking, Universal has such a distinct history with these kind of early monster films. They were really popular in like the very, very late 1920s, all the way to about the 1940s, if I'm not mistaken, Lou. And I just thought... And
I would say even after, when you consider they started doing comedic spoofs with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein or things like 50s. That.
Yeah. No, they were unbelievably popular. And they had crossover films, all kinds of stuff. And really, that's why Universal is like, hey, let's go ahead and do something with the monsters. And I think it's a perfect fit for a theme park. We'll go over all that, but I kind of wanted to take the show into that direction on this history of this very particular subgenre of film, the Universal monsters. How does that sound like?
Good to me. And, I was thinking about that as we were watching our usual montage at the beginning. And it occurred to me that there is a broader backlot in general rather than just monsters thing to explain. I'm always explaining all these obscure technical things. When you go on the tour at Universal in Hollywood or studio tours at other theme parks, you might say to yourself, well, that's nice, but it's kind of flat. And looking at some of those pictures of the backlots, particularly there's one that says Apothek, which is German for, an apothecary. Or there's one that shows the Court of Miracles. And then in color, as it is sitting there now, which is not the original because it burned down, but they rebuilt it. And then the shot in black and white of the Hunchback in that same spot. You might wonder why, as you go see them nowadays, in most cases, they seem kind of empty. And the answer is that these sets, these standing sets that were built maybe for one movie that had the budget, but most likely because they said, well, we can use that again for other things. They're all not what we call dressed, by which I mean it's one thing to have the buildings and they're painted a certain color and the streets are empty and it's ready to roll, but it's not ready to make a movie on. You got to put in, if it's an old time thing, they would put dirt on the street and gas lamps instead of electric lamps and the specific signage that they want in the buildings and the names on, like the names on Main Street at Disneyland. So they seem kind of empty. And especially now when we are going to have a permanently dressed, permanently ready to roll, permanently cinematically designed park in Orlando. And you can see there, I mean, that's nice, right? But you don't feel like anybody's living there. It looks like a movie set, right? And it is, and certainly, of course, the Court of Miracles in its real historic period wouldn't have, I see over there on the left, the one with the glamour tram driving through. But sets aren't ready for shooting until they're dressed, until people come in, like you see the guys in the in what look like Star Trek gold shirts and red shirts, fixing the lamp posts. And I think I mentioned one of our earlier shows that when all of this burned down in the terrible fire at Universal, although they had built it all new, they kept all the street patterns the same because underground were already the electric lines, the gas lines, the water lines, all the things needed to bring it to life. And you didn't want to have to reroute all of that stuff too, as long as you could build the buildings over it in the same way. But anyway, the point is, when you go to see Dark Universe, you feel like you're in this town of Darkmoor, somewhere in the Carpathians or something, rather than on a set or in a theme park. And as good as they are, theme park sets aren't movie sets. Well, I mean, when you walk through Fantasyland at Disney, it's beautiful and it's fun and it's got all the rides and it's dressed up, but it still feels like a set. Look at that building. Look at the depth of textures going on in the stonework. And of course, notice that the floors are not in yet there. Plus, of course, there's forced perspective when you're standing at ground level and looking up, and those towers, if you actually knew how tall a two-story building is and you knew how tall that building was, you would find out the numbers are different because the way they are designed, the way they're drawn on the page before they're ever built, is to push that perspective and make you feel either larger or smaller or within it. Another thing, chances are on a movie backlot, those trees just got there yesterday. They've got them all sitting somewhere and they bring them in, they put them in, they take them out. But one of the things about the entirety of Epic Universe, they've had trees in what was totally barren, digged out to the flat land for a year and a half, 2 years, growing in, so that when the day it opens, they don't look like they just got put in yesterday, or they aren't still in a wooden box or hiding behind a fence.
Right.
They've acclimated and grown in. I remember as a kid, I think I've mentioned before, going to Six Flags. Well, it wasn't then Six Flags, but just Magic Mountain. And it was great, and the coasters were wonderful, but boy, it still looked like where it is, which is out there in Valencia in the semi-desert of LA, with all the trees not quite tall enough and not quite bushy enough and not quite real enough. It was landscaping of a theme park. It wasn't a village in the woods like this is. So anyway, it's just about the comparison between theme parks and movies.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, in a theme park environment, these things have to look show ready all the time, and we've seen what happens when they don't maintain the show.
You were talking about trimming foliage that came a little too close to rides, and how there have been fires and things because they didn't get on it as quickly. So, right. And when you see some of BioReconstructors had some videos of the testing of some of these coasters in Epic Universe, and you'll see these cutouts. They look like the portal there, but an odd shape all along the track. And what that is if the people in the car broke all the rules, reached out, stuck their hands out when they were told to keep them in the car, would they get their arm taken off by the ride? And they run the ride vehicles through those keyholes, through those arches, through those places, so that although the ride may not be finished being built yet to that place, that's where it's going to be. And therefore, we have to be safe within that area. So there's a lot of thinking involved in this, people, and a lot of planning and a lot of what-ifing. And most of it, they hope never happens. But they've got to be careful to make sure it doesn't. So applaud them.
They got to be careful.
They deserve it.
They call it the envelope of protection test, what you're talking about there.
There you go.
Where they have like a bunch of, it's like a piece of plywood that's sat right into one of the coaster cars, and it has a bunch of 2x4 sticking out of it, essentially. And you ride that, you just let that go through the actual track itself, through the course. And if it comes back in one piece, you're good to go. If it comes back and you're missing a 2x4, it's like, well, we got to find where that happened. And you can just walk the track and, there's 2x4. Now we know exactly where it hit, and we can make those modifications. But yeah, I mean, envelope of protection, big deal. That's, and you can kind of see from an Imagineering perspective where they've taken that. So for like Rise of the Resistance, for example, when you get off that shuttle as you're transporting to the Star Destroyer, you'll see like this. If you're looking close, you'll see like this railing in front of the stormtroopers, and that's to provide that envelope of protection, but in a kind of a walking setting there.
I'm looking at some of the chats on some of the things we've just said, and there's some interesting things to address.
Please.
Let's see. Somebody said they named it Dark Moors. It's really Dark Moor singular, and it's all one word. But so it's not related to Hound of the Baskervilles per se. And it says Paris Street, Berlin Street, Victorian London Street. At the real Universal in Hollywood, it's all the same streets. They just changed the signs. Then Karen, who is a wonderful historian of all these things, saying that the classics ended with Creature in 56. I think the reason, Karen, that you can say it ended, but what happened was 56, what was everybody looking forward to? We're going to the moon.
Yes.
We're going to Mars, whatever.
Just about to
and
say
what
it.
happened was it switched from the classic monsters that were very, very, very history-based and also based in religious beliefs and good and evil to monster movies about anonymous reptilian bug-eyed monsters that we would find when we wandered out into the stars. So I think a lot of it was that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they even cite that as one of the reasons why they designed the Creature from Black Lagoon the way they did, is because to capitalize on that trend that was going on at the time.
Yeah. And yet, as alien as he is, he's swimming in waters on Earth, and therefore has a little grounding in our memories and our collective consciousness with real amphibians and other things of the sea. Jan Monroe says, Lou, how could you possibly say people are idiots? I'm alive and I'm in the world and I look around.
Here we go. Let's see if we can bring up a couple of links here. Do apologize, guys.
And I have to think that whole envelope of protection thing has become more important when they started selling a lot of booze in the parks. People are stupid anyway, but when they get drunk or legal pot or whatever it is they're taking, there's and look, my feeling, although I don't want anybody to come to any harm, is if you're only hurting yourself, that's one thing. But if you're in a car with 10 people on a ride and you do something that causes them all to be in danger, I say throw the book at you. But that's just corny old me.
Well, yeah, I would agree. This is why Universal's taking the tack that they have when it comes to ride restraints. If you look at Universal's restraints as compared to maybe somebody's like Disney's, they're far more restrictive, even with their smaller omnimover type attractions. For example, like Secret Life of Pets over there at Universal Studios Hollywood has some of the most restrictive restraints I've ever seen for an attraction like that. It's this kind of slow-moving dark ride, because they really are wanting to keep you restrained and not be able to get out whatsoever.
And what about over in China where some kid was able to climb out of one of the trackless vehicles and get run over?
That's a Disney attraction. There might be some, there is a thought process there in which might be conducive to maybe higher degree of safety.
Slightly off subject, but not really, because I can think of a way to get it back in. Look at these pictures. Look at these pictures. Right. You have to remember, as much as you want to be, Lon Chaney over there on the left did his own makeup, for God's sakes. He invented that look. But all of them as strange and as unearthly and as even Dracula, who looks like more human, they all had to do this with human beings. And therefore, there was a limit by the makeup technology of exactly what you could and couldn't do to make a human head or a human hand or whatever look alien, look different. And the reason I took note of that recently was I was comparing some of the alien characters in this Acolyte thing that I saw pictures of. And I was saying, well, that looks like the one in Star Trek that was so-and-so. And that looks like the one. In other words, they've made leaps and bounds in makeup, but they've gotten back to it's a human being, and there's only so many ways you can put a bump here and a double chin here and still have it be possible, rather than doing it entirely animated as CGI. But people, what do you think? Got any questions about this or anything else?
Please. Yes, this is
because I do know that we're here primarily to talk about movie studios and the biz. And while certainly the theme park biz is the biz, and in the case of Dark Universe, it's all based on movies. And the other thing, did you save those pictures I gave you the other day? The one with Boris Karloff, what was it, playing golf or boxing? You see this guy here? You see that scary face? He's almost as frightening as the Walt statue at Epcot with the monster lighter. But the point is, this is an ordinary guy. In case you don't know, his real name that he was born with was William Henry Pratt, no relation to Chris. And he was an actor, and he's just some guy. It's like Zaphod in Hitchhiker's Guide. But they made him into this thing. There's a picture of him being made up. And it's interesting that the guy on the left in particular, but even the guy, they're all wearing these smocks that are makeup smocks, but they also look like medical smocks. And they're kind of costumed, although this was not intentional, the way Dr. Frankenstein is in the original movie. And if you look at the pictures, I don't know how many million things. If you look way up at the top of the screen, folks, this is the man. Lon Chaney was known as the man of 1,000 faces. Vash is known as the man of the 1,000 links and tabs, because he's got everything at his fingertips. But the pictures of the makeup thing at Dark Universe, they're all dressed in those smocks of another era too. That all they need is the headband with the reflector on it to be Dr. whatever. But here's God. There's Lon, the good old. Now, remember, this is Lon Chaney Sr. His son, Lon Chaney Jr., was the Wolfman. Go to the one just to the left of this. Go one to the left from the one you're on now. There's what he really looked like.
Gotcha.
There's what he really looked like, and he made all his own makeup and became that next one to the right.
And it's
his
fascinating
son, right below there, is Lon Chaney Jr., his son.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there he is as the Wolfman, and just to the left of that is what he looked like in reality. Yeah.
Now, Lon Chaney, he passed away pretty early on in this whole expedition, right? Yeah, 1930. Oh,
yeah. Well, but he'd been doing it a long time. He'd been doing stage, and then of course the movies. Indeed, until relatively recently, the stage was still there, the Phantom Stage on Universal's Backlot, which was a big sound stage with a complete theater, both the backstage and the front and the opera boxes and everything, that was built actually not for his Phantom, but for the one that Claude Rains did in the 50s. But I saw that stage on Midnight Special and all kinds of different shows where it was like, we've got it, let's use it. And that happened a lot too. I've mentioned before how they desperately tried to get the Hello Dolly Street at Fox into other things Because it's one thing to say I'm going to build a New York turn of the century street. It's another thing to say it's going to have an elevated train track and a little bit of Central Park. And so there you go. There's the Phantom stage. It was on it many times. Yeah,
it was so famous.
It was huge, and it would. I think the reason they didn't tear it down was because it would have been so expensive to rebuild it ever. It was like, we've got it, it's there. And Universal, unlike some of the studios, had so much space that they didn't need that stage that badly. Although sometimes, go back up to that one with the big open elephant door. By the way, we call them elephant doors, the big doors on a stage that they can wheel sets in. You see how much space there is? They could build a smaller set within that, and you'd never know the rest of it was there if you didn't light it.
Fair point.
So it wasn't like you were losing a stage forever to have it sitting there. Remember, most all of the other stages on a lot, they tear things out, they put things in, they rebuild, they reuse. This never changed for, golly,
really. So the walls lined.
That was there all those years I was doing shows there.
Really?
Yeah. Now that, of course, is a mat. But the bottom is the real thing, and the rest of it's a mat. But yeah, it was just called the Phantom. I think it was, I'm trying to think, 46, 45. I forget which stage number it was. But yeah, it was just there all the time. And it almost got to the point where even if it was a sitcom, it was, we're going to the opera, just so they could go over there and shoot a scene on it or write it into a script they already had. It's kind of funny looking at that. Go down a little bit to the next one. On the right, doesn't he kind of look like Jack Nicholson sometimes?
A little bit, yeah.
Wacky Jack.
He's got that smile. Yeah.
That's his makeup kit.
If you guys are wondering, folks, what actually happened to the Phantom of the Opera stage, it was there, like Lou said, for decades and decades. And they just recently got rid of it in order to build Super Nintendo World out there at Universal Studios Hollywood.
Needed the space.
And it's a premium there for sure, especially in the LA area, and specifically when you're nearest the theme park. That's why it's slowly eating up a little bit of the studio, a little bit of it at a time. Wow, just incredible. Okay, stage 28.
28, yes. Because I was...
Goodness. So cool. So amazing.
Well, and there was that
just love the history of this.
Which was always with this, of course, but then there were the two other big ones. 24, which is where they did out towards the front of the lot, like just over the fence from Technicolor, which is where they did American Gladiators for all those years. And then the other one was over on the other side of the lot. Anyway, that was the one where they did the Hindenburg. I think I've told the story. I was over there one day, and the unions had called in OSHA because this was for the interior of the Hindenburg. It was all the wires and gas bags and scaffoldings that get chased through in the movie. And the studio said, it's fine. And the grips and the electricians literally refused to work on it until they called in OSHA because they thought it was dangerous. And I was there. The OSHA guy shows up. They're all standing outside the door of the stage. And the OSHA guy stands up and steps in, looks around and says, okay, let's get started. And wham, half of it fell down. We never found out if that was on cue by somebody, but it was kind of scary funny that it literally collapsed while he was there.
That's pretty crazy. It's a crazy story. Whenever you tell it, it's like, oh my God. Cal OSHA, folks. It exists not just on the Acolyte, but
that's right. If you need a set inspected, go see Cal. Somebody will get that who lived there then. But anyway,
I would turn this into 3D view, but actually I'm using my trackpad here, so I don't think it's working right now. But you can kind of see the proximity of the lower lot. This is Universal Studios Hollywood is what you're looking at right here, and this is what's called the lower lot, because the theme park is on 2 levels, and this lower lot is where basically the majority of your productions are filmed. Obviously, there's a whole side to this that we're not seeing in this frame here, but you can kind of see what Lou's talking about when it comes to the sound stages and the proximity to everything, and how close that is to the actual theme park itself.
I'm just reliving memories on various numbered buildings.
Yes.
Well, in fact, let's see. You see that
Hmm?
icon of me that you all see flashing when I'm talking.
Right.
That is, I think that's 24 behind. Let's see, 20, 21. Yeah, I think it's actually I can't point you to a corner, but, and of course, this was all E.T., this big building here. And back when I was doing shows, if we had an hour or two to kill, we'd go through a little gate right about where it says search this area. Right about there was a gate, and come in here and go on the rides and do things, and then go back to work. And then I've told the story. One time I was there and I was talking with a couple on the big, huge escalator here that goes up and down the hill. And they were visitors. And, this is great. We always wanted to see this. I said, yeah, the studio. She said, no, the escalator. Excuse me? They were there for an Otis Elevator convention in L.A. And they had built the escalator there. And these people, they were on a busman's holiday. They wanted to go see the stuff their company made. So
I'm trying to find a full image of the image that you use. I know I have one somewhere. I just can't find it right
anyway,
now. But what Lou's talking about right there is the Universal Starway.
The Starway, yes. It's a starway to the stairs or something.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
An incredible feat of engineering because it's
when you see things on this hill, folks, first of all, it's a lot steeper than it looks in still photography. And second of all, we have these little things in Southern California called earthquakes. So underneath that, which looks like, you just dig a hole the right depth and sink a piling and put it on top. No. It goes way, way down into the earth so that it won't fall down with a bunch of people on it when something moves. Indeed, if you look right at the top of that picture in the middle, the dark tower there is the old original headquarters building. And when they made the movie Earthquake and wanted to show it swaying in the wind, in the earthquakeness, they took a big, like a funhouse mirror that was flexible. Yeah, that's it. And stood at the bottom and shot into the mirror and up at the building and wiggled it. Like the curvy mirrors in a funhouse. That's how they made the building move in Earthquake. Which sounds like it wouldn't be convincing, but you know what? You put in the right sound effects, and suddenly movie magic ensues.
Here we go. I finally found it's not the complete photo, but it's
there you
it's
go.
Close.
Well, of course I composited that. In fact, I think it's 27. I think over my chin there. Or maybe 37, yeah.
Okay, 37.
But when people in the biz look at pictures of backlot buildings, we instantly know which studio they are because they're all different colors. Universal is this kind of slightly brownish gray, mostly.
Yeah.
And Warner Brothers is more orange and tan, and MGM was always kind of silvery gray, and that's how you can
kind of see what we're talking about here, folks. I believe there's there we go. That one right there, stage 28.
Yeah,
you can see it's like an off brown taupe color. It's very strange. But
that's
I thought they were all like that, but I guess the studios have their own branding. We have a question here, Lou.
Good.
By Karen Owens. If Universal is short of space, why did they move NBC operations to their studios and sell NBC Burbank?
Well, first of all, that's NBC operations West Coast. There's still this little thing called Rockefeller Center where the really big stuff is. And second of all, they're all now divisions of a larger corporation rather than things unto themselves. And so I think the land in Burbank was probably a better value to them sold than it was to keep it. There isn't a Johnny Carson show the same way there used to be, where they had this huge stage in there for the audience for that show. And for Leno after him. The answer basically is some accountant decided that was a better deal. When Universal, to give you an idea how the problem of having been around a long time and being in a business where things are constantly being rebuilt and rewritten and redone, Uh, when they bought Polygram, which is a big international media company, they said, well, gee, we've got to have cities and places where there's a Polygram office and there's a Universal office. And this is before they owned NBC, but why couldn't we consolidate some of them and save some money if we're paying a lot for office space or whatever? So they did an audit of every square foot of building all of these companies that were getting together owned. That black building I told you about, the old original Universal Tower, the house that Lou built, so to speak, it's a square building. It's a square, 10, 12, 14-story building. According to the official architectural records, no two floors had the same square footage. How is that possible in a square building? And the answer is it's been repartitioned and redone and walls put in and walls taken out, and they just, all you had was the most recent version of that floor, rather than the history of all of them and how they really, the walls are the walls. You didn't bump out a wall in a square black glass building. But the record said they were all different. All of them. No two alike. So that's the kind of craziness that happens over time.
Here we go.
And then when you
Finally
figure
got
in,
it.
not in Universal's case, but in the other's case, the Golden Rivet, yeah. So, and then those of you who are old and liked good television, you will remember The Name of the Game, great TV show with Gene Barry and Tony Franciosa and Robert Stack. And that was the headquarters of Howard Publications, which was Gene Barry's magazine empire. And he supposedly had a private apartment up on the roof behind his office. He pushed a button in his office and the wall swung open. It was a big abstract painting. And then he had a private entrance down on the ground floor where his elevator took him down to his limo and like that. So, you know, if you own it, you own it and you do it. We talked about already the Sheraton Universal having been built for the use of shooting. Yeah, there's the old stage. I'm looking at my old, now that big one over here. See, I'm putting my mouse, I mean nothing. Take the main entrance in here over on the left, the long straight street, and go to where that corner is, where it kind of jogs left a little, and you will find that big square flat wall you see just up and to your right, Vash, that's the Phantom.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
okay, now I
you
know
know.
my orientation. Wow, that's so crazy because that's the lower lot, and then that's the where the Starway would be. It would be
Yeah,
going
that
up
whole
right
hill
here.
there. Look, well, and of course they tell the story, you know, before there was a tour that was used for, hey, we're out in the woods, but we're really just on the back lot.
Right.
If you watch the movie Spartacus, and there is a scene of all the gladiators marching down the Appian Way that they shot on that hill, actually on an adjunct of that pathway that you take down the escalator now. And they needed guys to play gladiators. So what did they do? They went to UCLA and got the football team and dressed them in togas and had them, you know, for the guys with the big muscles and everything, to marching and made body makeup and everything else. But there's a great goof in that movie that you might want to look for, and that is they forgot to have them take their wristwatches off. And so as they're marching down this sunny road and the Roman music is playing, you see all this reflection off of their left wrist, most of them. And it's, you know, a gladiator with a Timex. So go figure. There's a lot of that in that movie, in all those movies. And here, the one on the right, the very big stage over on the right was 20, I forget the number, but that's the one where I told you that the Hindenburg was and where that thing happened.
Gotcha.
Anyway.
I believe that soundstage, I want to say it's still there. I'm not sure though.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it was, let's see, Colossus, the Forbin project, the big computer was in there. And I'm trying to think of some of the other big movies that they did there because it was a couple of big stages, you know. And then, of course, yeah, and if you go there, Gate 2 and...
yeah, I think that's it right there.
Yeah, it's still there.
Right.
I used to, when I was, well, I don't want to get too personal, but once upon a time I had a more of a construction type of job when I was in school. And it was in the evening. It was what was called the late shift, the second shift, which basically meant you came on 3 or 4 in the afternoon and you worked until midnight or so. And when lunch hour came, you took your lunch just like you'd bring it to school, and you'd pick some place to go have dinner. I remember having dinner on the roof of that building a lot of the times because it was nice up there in the summertime. The lights of the city twinkle and all the rest of that stuff.
Oh, it's beautiful there. I mean, one of the greatest memories that I have of going to Universal Studios Hollywood is being there just late enough to where you can actually see the night because it closes so early. But looking over that hill there and seeing that beautiful valley just all lit up is really awesome. So,
which is why it was so great when they first built the amphitheater and all there was a stage and looking out of the valley.
Yeah.
And then people complained about the noise and the lights, and they started building buildings, and actually not full buildings, but just a wall around it. And then they eventually made it into an indoor arena, and now it's Hogwarts. Go figure.
It was the Gibson Theater, right?
But before it even had a name, it was just called the Universal Amphitheater. Right. And what that told me, when they decided, since they didn't have any place else to put it, that was the place to lose in order to build. Let's see, what year is that? That just went past.
It is 2013.
Yeah, 2013. There you go.
Because
in those days, so many music acts were making the majority of their money not from records but from concerts. And when they decided that was going to go forever, you realized that era was changing. That the concert business was not worth the same amount as the theme park business.
I remember those gates for
when it was still the outdoor amphitheater, of course, that was they had shows at night on the Westworld stage out there too. So there were so many different places where they doubled up. As I think I've mentioned before, when they originally had the totally exposed outdoor arena, that used to be where the stunt show was too, because they literally had the sets on a train track, and they'd roll in the old Western Street with all the stuff to jump off of and the balconies to shoot each other off of in the daytime when the tour was running. And then at about 4 or 5 o'clock, they'd close that down, roll it out, roll in whatever was necessary for the concert on a platform. So
crazy.
Best backpacks for Disney and other theme parks. Oh gosh, you mean there's a worst one?
Well,
I read these things and I go, God, it.
I just found it. Hang on a second. Come on.
What did you find?
Load. I think I got it here.
Yeah, well, that's what it was. But originally, the roof, everything was not there. There were just a couple of light towers on either side, kind of like those towers for Fantasmic at Disneyland. And then when I went there one time, one of the best shows I ever saw there was ELO, Electric Light Orchestra. And if you go back to, you can see it in that one too. Do you see up at the top the fence at the back?
Right.
The back row, they actually had this fence built around there. And ELO had their cello player right down here in the front of the stage. And there was a pit. And there were lasers. And they came out of the pit, hit this mirror cello. It was all silvered. And it was set up for the beams to bounce back over your head in the audience and hit little mirrors that were on the top of this wall and then skew off into the night sky like you were under a curtain of light. It was, oh man, was it great.
That's cool.
It was really great. And then, people complained because Karens are not a new phenomenon, ladies and gentlemen. They've been out there for decades, believe me.
And then obviously, it would eventually get torn down, make way for Harry Potter. What a trip! What a trip, for sure. I think we have a couple of questions right here.
Yeah.
I had Karen Owens chat up the whole time. Sorry about that, guys. Pago Sith says, sorry for the side topic comment, but I love the Mad World flashback core memory joy. Lou is awesome. I have this weird feeling of deja vu or knowing him in a previous life I had with WBT.
Well, what did you do at WB? I did some things there over the years.
All right.
The
Punk Walter.
And, so somebody asked, who's my favorite superhero?
Yes. That was Josh Hammond, I believe.
Well, I was a Batman guy before Batman was cool. But I got to tell you, I know people didn't like the movie, but I really like Green Hornet. Or Green Hornet, what am I saying? He's fine too, but Green Lantern. I kind of like having that oath and following it. But Batman. And then on the Marvel side, certainly Spidey. But I used to, golly, there were so many of the like second level X-Men and second level Avengers that I always thought were more fun because they didn't have to, represent goodness.
Yeah.
They could just have fun and be wise guys. So,
Right.
when Kiss came to, well, I don't know if Jan Monroe asked about Kiss. Punk Waddle. Yeah, well, we weren't speaking of them, but here you are anyway. When Kiss came to town, we mentioned with the genre guys when we talked about Roller Coaster, the movie, which used the Universal originated Sensurround system, that when they finished doing the only 4 movies they did that way, what happened to all that Sensurround equipment? The discos loved it, and they bought it like crazy. And so it makes sense that the vibrations from a concert speaker would also be that thud, 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 thud that always happened at discos in that era.
Man, that must have been really, really cool to feel in person. That is.
Yeah, well, Josh also definitely Ben Grimm. I identified. I'm big and I clobber. No.
Captain America fan for sure. Love the.
I like Captain America too, and I think the movies made him into such a tight ass. I was kind of upset about that.
Oh, that's a shame.
That whole combat between him and Iron Man, and of course Iron Man. I thought it was very interesting that of all that they could have chosen to do, that Iron Man was the one who basically started the ball rolling for the new Marvel era.
Really
because first of all, I thought in that period where everybody was dissing on Playboy types, that to do another Playboy type was probably a tough choice for them to make. It was the right choice, but because you had Downey and he was such a smartass. If he was Bruce Wayne, it never would have taken off the way it did.
Well, that movie's remarkable for a number of reasons. So one, Marvel took a huge gamble at that time period because they didn't have many of the rights to their other characters. They wanted to launch this new thing called the MCU, and were putting it really on that first movie and putting it on Robert Downey Jr.'s shoulders, who was had just come out of rehab not too long ago, who was obviously an established actor but kind of fell out of favor with the public somewhat because of those scandals. So that was kind of a real trick right there. Jon Favreau talks about didn't even have a script, so every single day before actually shooting a scene, they'd be rewriting scripts and pages and so forth. Just a hectic production, but it really came together in the editing room. And I know Jeff Bridges and stuff, they talk about their time doing that movie quite fondly because it was, kind of seat of your pants type filmmaking. Not the...
Well,
and it worked in that...
That can work very well.
Right.
The problem is these movies are inordinately expensive.
Exactly.
And so if you don't have a little bit of planning, they can get insanely expensive very quickly, and we've seen the result. Oh, I see. Look who's in the chat.
Follow the Bradley's phone.
Thank you for joining our train of thought. I said wink, wink, nod, nod, because the Bradleys have been taking the train in the last day or two.
We got a question right here from Eric Stratton. Have you read the Jerry Green autobio about 30 years at Universal Studios Hollywood from tour operator to show director?
No. And I didn't even know anything about it. I'll go look for it now. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, that sounds real interesting. There's so many great backlot stories, especially when it comes to Universal itself, how Walt, but also Steven Spielberg used to sneak onto the backlot and get himself in all kinds of trouble.
Well, that's how he got going. Other than being another film school person like me. And
I know Walt really took to it only because. Oh,
Answer immediately.
got a little bit of a call there, guys. Sorry about that. Everybody's trying to get a hold of me. Do
Well,
apologize, but
you're popular. What can I say?
I guess so. I guess so. So Walt was really taken by it because he was like, "Whoa, look! You can go a couple steps, and wow, you're at 6 Points, Texas." Or you can go a little bit, and now you're, in the forecourt or something in the courtyard square.
Yeah.
Those themes change from one place to another, and a lot of people kind of attribute that to how Disneyland's laid out and where you have multiple themes rather than just one theme.
Well,
theme
I'll
park
tell you,
that are
next time you go to Disneyland, you can go see my favorite example of that nobody pays attention to.
Ooh.
Take yourself to about where the Bengal barbecue thing is in Adventureland, and go look at the roof lines at the top of the building. And what you will see as you turn that corner there where Aunt Jemima's was, and now I forget what they call it lately, and you will see a very weird thing, and it's brilliant. What are the very, very straight, square, up and down plantation-y things of Frontierland become these increasingly bizarre, increasingly wavy, increasingly curvy, increasingly exotic and African or Oriental or whatever you want to call it. And it's all the same wall. It's a smooth, seamless transition. And people don't notice it, but I do. And now you will.
Yes. So it's hard to get a picture of what Lou is describing here, but if you can see this kind of Adventureland area of Disneyland,
well, you're on the front side. I'm talking about around the back as we get to the river.
Right around the river. Maybe River Barrel Terrace, but it's really cool because you have one central facility between something like the Golden Horseshoe or the River Barrel Terrace or the Bazaar or even the Frontierland stores on the other side.
Yeah.
But they're all kind of surrounded by different themes.
And that's very Backlot because it's called you're building one building and you just dress it different ways. And of course, it was easier to do. There's a comparison for the theme parks and the backlots because in those days when you're doing the backlots, you're going to make a bunch of war movies and a bunch of Western movies or any particular genre. There we go with the genre thing again. And that's first of all, going from that white to the pink. And notice how, if you really look carefully, this peak roof is at a sharper peak than this peak roof. But I'm talking about, the right and the left, the pink versus the white. I keep pointing with my mouse on my screen and thinking it's showing up there, and of course it isn't. But I'm talking as you go from here to the right and around the corner.
Yeah.
And they did that so well. The other place, of course, they did that trick in a different way is in New Orleans Square. If you go to across the street from the restaurant and you look at these wrought iron balcony things in New Orleans Square, you can catch them getting away with or they don't get away with it because I caught it, the whole forced perspective thing, because there's 3 floors and they're all 3 the same shape of uprights and arches and uprights and arches, but the height of the upright on the next floor is a little shorter and the next floor is a little shorter. And you're really putting in about 2 stories of building in a 3-story appearance. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one right there.
Yep.
Just really look at how much taller the ground floor is than this second one. And then really just look between where the triangle ends and the upright begins on these posts. Compare that to the one above. And it's half as much.
Right.
But if you look at it from this angle, it doesn't seem that way. And remember, none of this is by accident. I mean, look over here on the left, how you see that this is a height and then it drops down and then it goes back up. If it was just one straight thing, it would be okay and it would look like New Orleans, but it wouldn't have the texture. And of course, the big thing there are the ship's masts behind the roof.
Yes.
Giving the impression that there's a whole port of New Orleans there behind it, and all there is a mast. I don't know if you can get that famous.
I believe I can. I have another one for you just real fast. Unfortunately, in recent years with the Club 33 redo of this,
right,
that just recently took place, some of that forced perspective, at least on the other side of that structure that we were just looking at, has
Right.
been kind of damaged because of these huge windows that just take
But
you right out of it.
But even within that, the fact that they kept the two on the left with arches that go higher than
Yeah.
the actual glass here, and then on the left side, there's these kind of plantery things, and these big friezes are taller. It's the variation. It's the juxtaposition of various heights and widths and angles that makes it. There you go. There's no ship back there, folks.
Nope. Nope.
But if you're standing down there on the ground, especially as far away as at the Mark Twain riverfront,
Right.
it sells. It works. It's there.
It really does. It really does make you believe that you're in this kind of port city, which New Orleans obviously is.
Well, there's a funny thing about that too. The real New Orleans,
yes.
yeah, it's a port on the river, but when you leave actually right there at the waterfront, New Orleans, and head for the ocean, do you know it's like, I forget, a lot of miles. It's not as many miles as it's 5 times as many miles as the crow flies because of the way the river twists and turns and zigs and zags on its way to the sea. So, and yet they still get flooded. Ha ha! Surprise.
They do. They do. Oh,
anyhow,
I can talk about theme parks all day, folks. I think it's.
You
it's
could if you didn't
because...
have so much editing to do, right?
Yeah, I know. Oh well, that's a whole other story. But it's funny because we started out being inspired by the theme park take on the Universal monsters, and well, where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves back in theme parks again because they really do go hand in hand. As you know, these what creates an immersive environment. I think you have a little bit of commentary on that, Lou. What creates an immersive environment, whether you see it on the screen or whether you see it on, in a physical environment in front of you, a lot of the same techniques are used.
I'm looking over here at our dear friend Ron says, I wish there were studio lots in places other than Hollywood and Atlanta. And other people are talking about the back lots of Hollywood, all of which shrunk, all of which were cut down and sold off for real estate. The old RKO lot, the MGM, what they used to call Lot 7, although there really weren't 7, was turned into condos because it was MGM, but they didn't need all that space. That was the lot there, the one lot there, that lot. It had everywhere in the world on one lot. It had the Middle East, it had Asia, it had New Orleans, it had Western ranches. And you literally, I mean, that is how, as I've said before, that's how the man from U.N.C.L.E. was able to, where are we going this week? Japan. Where are we going next week? Hey, the bad guy just left Greece and went to China. And it was a 10-minute walk, from one to the other. In fact, did I tell that story about U.N.C.L.E. and about Leo G. Carroll here? I wonder if I did. If I didn't, you'll like it anyway. In Robert Vaughn's autobiography, he talks about Leo G. Carroll, Mr. Waverly, who basically got that job because of playing more or less the same spy master part in North by Northwest. And by the way, the fact that he got that job is why Ilya Kuryakin remained, because they didn't like him at the network. They wanted to get rid of David McCallum when they saw the pilot. But the guy who in the pilot played the head of U.N.C.L.E. was a guy named Kaluva with a K. And they got a memo at the studio saying, recast that guy whose name starts with a K. And they thought they were talking about Kaluva and recast him as Leo G. Carroll, but they were talking about the character Kuryakin, so go figure. But anyway, Leo was nearing the end of his life when he was doing that, and he'd been sick. And they were working in one of those areas on that lot that was quite a distance away from the central restrooms on the lot. And Robert Vaughn tells the story. He says, we broke for lunch, and I saw Leo starting to walk off in that direction. I said, Leo, we can get you a car, And he said, that's all right, dear boy. I'll be finished by the time I get there anyway. He'd had cancer and had a colostomy bag. So he said, I'll be finished by the time I get over there anyway. The magic of the movies. The magic of the movies. Anyway.
I'm looking at this lot, and it is absolute. I mean, at least in its heyday, anyway. It
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
massive. Holy smokes! It makes the Universal lot
And
look
that's
like.
not the one where all the New York streets that were in all the musicals were. That was on the main lot. Yeah, well, MGM was MGM,
Well,
and
yeah, yeah.
they
Bigger's
did it
better.
all. But
Wow.
again, a big chunk of it is turned into condos in probably the 70s or 80s.
Mm.
Um, and what the heck? It's and you have to also remember that starting probably in the 60s, but certainly after that, movies were much more about contemporary stuff. There weren't these great big historical pageants. There weren't these great big war movies. Um, they didn't need the backlots. They felt they could do it on location, and they thought that was better. And then they got the bill. But anyway,
Yeah, then they get the bill. Well, here's the thing, Lou.
the stockpile of stuff. Because
Right.
one thing about Hollywood is they throw nothing away. I've mentioned
Yeah.
that we noticed on Forbidden Planet that the alien plants on this strange extraterrestrial garden were reworks of the stuff from Munchkinland. And you're going, what? How could that be? Well, it happened a lot. I remember once upon a time going to a premiere of a very famous film, and it was a film about the good old, I can say there were a lot of people there. It was That's Entertainment. And I decided that I was going to get myself a classic 1930s tailcoat tux to go along with the mood, right? And so I went to Western Costume, which is the big, huge repository of costume stuff. And the guy walks you through the place. And he points over to one wall, and he says, there's the German army. And then he points to the next wall, and he says, in this case, it was nobody out there watching this probably don't know Sonia Henney, but she was an ice skating star and made a lot of movies that took place, well, like they did Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates. Here in one wall in this 7 or 8 story building, there were like, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 pair of wooden shoes. Not going to use those too much anymore, but they're still there waiting for the moment. So nothing ever got thrown away. Now, MGM had their famous auction where they basically sold off all this stuff. I mean, huge amounts. You can go find the stuff about that online, and certainly I had copies of the catalogs. And I'm talking, when I say this stuff, I'm saying everything from the ruby slippers to a locomotive and everything in between. And, Goldwyn, huh? Well, it's just somebody says they were, my old boss was married to the G in MGM. Well, let's see. CGI is great, but it hurts all that movie making magic. It's Jillian. I know, science fiction double feature. Dr. X will build his creature. And
well,
she knew
apparently
Arrow was over the barrel. Yeah.
Apparently, they had a Universal at that time, which would have been Carl Lindley, when they were talking about making the first Universal monster film. Apparently, it's like, okay, the runtime needs to be short enough to do a double feature. So,
well, yeah,
that's kind of interesting thing.
In fact, Ron, I've got a picture somewhere. He's saying he misses the streets of America and Disney's Hollywood Studios. Oh, okay. I was thinking of the real studio in Burbank, and it was relatively small, and there was this sort of Victorian houses street that showed up in a lot of things. And I've got a picture somewhere. The base, of course, the mechanism of the monorail at Disneyland was, built by the monorail people, but the body work, if you will, the covering that sat on it, I've got a picture of them working on that Victorian street on the backlot somewhere. So you did what you could do. Did I put that on the general? I'll find it, Vash, and we'll put it up, or at least a link to it. There's a guy doing all the great old episodes of the Walt Disney shows. And it was one where they were promoting Babes in Toyland by we're taking you on a tour of the lot to show you, to take you to the party they're doing for the cast. And really was an excuse, of course, to promote the movie. And they wander around the lot at Disney, and you see all kinds of things that you're saying, they still had that there because they were always the smallest. They only had a couple of sound stages. But you make do with what you got and you make it work. And
Indeed.
the three studios in a line there between Universal and Warner Brothers and Disney, they were all much bigger. Warner Brothers Backlot was about twice as big as the studio is now. And now it's all houses because when they sold off the pieces, they built little houses. And if you go outside the back gate, the west side gate at Fox, where we went when we did our little wandering around tour, there were 3 or 4 great 1930s, 40s old houses there that the studio actually owned. And if an actor, say from New York, was coming out to do a movie, they'd put him in that house for the duration so they could walk right onto the lot from there. And now it's really kind of strange because it's a regular West Side residential street, but at the end of it, where maybe a cul-de-sac would be, there's a gate to the studio. It never opens anymore, but it's there. And suddenly there's these big walls, Anyway, what else is going on? Let's see.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Lou, why not just have a kind of shared backlot that all the studios can actually use?
Because they're not friends.
I guess so.
Because as I know from negotiating with the studios on behalf of one of the major unions, you go into this room and everybody on your side's on the same side. Everybody on the other side is not on the same side by any stretch of the imagination. And I've seen some interesting attitudes, let's say. Because remember, this is all the people negotiating the contract. They still have to go back to Big Bob and the other bosses to get an okay on what deal they make. But in the meanwhile, these are HR people and middle management people all representing their studios, but all supposedly collectively representing the studio ownership en masse. Well, I don't want their movies to make money. I want mine to make money. And so, I mean, I'm going to tell this in a very, very abstract way because I shouldn't. But when we were negotiating one time over the very advent of green screens and CGI stuff that would involve staffing as to how many people you had to have there on the set to do a certain thing. One studio had the first movie on the schedule after the negotiation hopefully was solved for such a movie. The others hadn't really done it yet. They'd seen it done. They sort of figured they would someday. But, these people have a very short event horizon in their thinking sometimes.
Sure.
And so this person who had one coming was under pressure from their bosses to make the best deal they could and keep it inexpensive because they were committed to the movie and it was the only way to do it. And they all said, well, you guys go back. There's 2 rooms at the MPAA, one for the producer side and one for the whatever guild it happens to be. And they are across a big courtyard. It's the front entrance of the building. It's a big U-shaped building. And they told us after there was a certain amount of obvious friction within the ranks for them over this thing, you guys go back to your side and cool it for an hour and we'll discuss it some more and see what we can get it done. And we go back to our side and I look out the window at the courtyard and I see the representative of the one studio that had the movie about to be made that wanted the pacing, screaming into her cell phone, absolutely livid. And we made the deal. And I found out later what happened was all the other studios told that studio, well, look, if this is really that important to you, I tell you what, we'll all make the deal and you can get struck all by yourself. What? How do you enter into a reasonable negotiation when the people you're negotiating against hate each other that much? And it only got worse with all of these mergers and reconfigurations of these various companies, because maybe at this year's, there are 3 different organizations on that side. And at the next one, they're all going to be one company. And therefore, 2 of those 3 people that have been the negotiators don't have a job at that point because there's nobody for them to negotiate on behalf of. So the contentious nature of the studios should not be discounted. And by the way, as I keep warning everybody, by a week from Monday, as we do this, by the 1st of July, we may be in a strike again because the IA and the Teamsters are still at a point where they don't have a deal, and they have both announced, often in studio negotiations, folks, if they're getting close, everybody will say, okay, look, we'll extend past the contract deadline, and when we make a deal, whatever the improvements are, we'll retroactively pay everything. In other words, we'll just keep doing like we're doing because we're getting somewhere. Before this negotiation even began, the IA, which is everybody else besides the writers, the directors, and the actors, and it's the below the line, as we call it. It's grips and electricians and cameramen and craft service and drivers, because they're with the Teamsters. They said, we're not going to extend, and we're not going to go beyond the date, and we're going to ask for a strike vote and get it, because last time, 3 years ago, they made a deal based on an extension, and the rank and file voted for it, but just barely, because they didn't like the deal. So they can't do that again. So we got a week to solve one of the problems. During the previous strikes of the other guilds, these guys, because they wanted to keep their people alive, gave them their health and pension benefits, even though they weren't paying in. So their pension plan is, I think, $650 million in the hole right now. And they want the producers, who they believe deserve some of the credit for that, because part of them extending those negotiations kept everybody out of work. They want them to somehow solve that problem for them. We'll see.
Yeah.
But all these things you hear about at Disney and everywhere, oh, well, we're shooting this movie and we'll have it out by so-and-so. As of the 1st of next month, all bets are off. We'll see. Now, they could make a deal this week. They're all scheduled to be busily negotiating. But the pressure's on.
Pressure's on. Speaking of shooting films and so forth, yes, Snow White going back to reshoots, which is that's interesting. Weird. Weird.
It's Snow White and the 7 budgets.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how
the
much
7
that movie's
years
gonna be.
or whatever it happens to be, but we shall see.
Also, Blade's having
the best restaurant I've brokered a deal in. Somebody wants to know.
Yes, go and show me with $4.99.
I don't confuse those two deals. I can enjoy my meal if that's what I'm doing, and if they're paying, it's going to be someplace I don't want to go. So,
thank you so much, Go and Shogi. Seriously, for that $4.99. Absolutely, thank you. He continues. I've cooked in a lot of restaurants for a lot of Hollywood muckety mucks. So I'm curious, Lou's favorite spot. Yeah, what was your favorite spot in Hollywood anyway?
In Hollywood, my God, that's a broad perspective. You remember, Hollywood is a geographic location, but it's also a state of mind. Go and Shogi, you should know that in my other life, I was a semi-famous food, wine, spirits, and hospitality writer, editor, ghostwriter. And so I'm altogether too familiar with the restaurant business in LA.
Lou's got good taste.
So you want to know restaurants I like in LA? I moved away 6 years ago, and my statement always when people asked me about restaurants was, if I haven't been there lately, I can only tell you my last best experience or worst. And my big question when people tell me, gosh, I went to that place you loved and it was lousy, what happened? I always ask them, did you say something? Did you ask something? Did you make a point of talking to somebody in charge? And if so, how did they react? Because as good as they can be on any given day, things can fall apart. And so it's about consistency, in my opinion. And I mean, I go back to the old days that most of you don't even remember. Golly, there was a place on the Sunset Strip called Scandia that was one of the most spectacularly good LA restaurants. And of course, there's others that have been around forever that used to be great and probably aren't as much anymore, like, I don't know, Lowry's or a lot of the classic Mexican places. And certainly, I don't know why we're all of a sudden on a food binge here, but it works for me. You have to remember that it has always been my contention that the best restaurants in LA are better in 90% of the cases than even the countries from which their cuisine comes. Why? Because LA has great audiences for restaurants. LA gives feedback. When I said about, did you ask when it was bad and what they wanted to do about it? Lowry's. Okay, that's a good place. That's a good place. But it's not as good as it used to be. When suddenly I saw packs of tourists in Bermuda shorts going into Lowry's. I said, well, Lowry's isn't Lowry's anymore. It's still good, but it isn't Lowry's. And by the way, you may not know this. Lowry's is a famous, some of you who follow football might know it because they always have this thing that they call the Beef Bowl, where the two competing teams for the Rose Bowl come to Lowry's. Lowry's is called, and it's spelled Lawrys because his name is Lawrence. And so Laurie is his nickname. Gotcha. Lowry's is a prime rib place, and it is the prime rib place. And anyway, Lowry's the prime rib is technically the name, and that's all they do. Oh, they have now a couple other things, but mostly it was you go there and you have prime rib, and the only thing you order is how big a cut and what sides you want with it. And they have these silver carts. If you look, I bet you could find a picture of Lowry's carts. There you go. See the guy over there carving behind the reservations thing? They roll those around, come to your table, carve your beef at your table. They have a great salad. Anyway, there, look at that. Oh, I want some. Now I'm hungry. Darn. Anyway, funny enough, that company started making potato chips. The Lowry's family had a potato chip stand in Glendale where they made fresh potato chips when that was a new thing, when there wasn't Lay's in every corner. And then they built this Scottish inn called the Tam O'Shanter, which I'll find a way to tie it in, you see.
I know where you're going.
Who was a big customer at the Tam O'Shanter? And Lawrence Frank, the man who owned it, drawn by the artists, it was where the Disney animators hung out. And rightly so. And you can still get the potato chips in the bar, by the way. Anyway, they built that one. They did Lowry's. There was one in South Bay called the Five Crowns, and everything is all Scottish. Well, look at this with Tom Baker as Doctor Who in the Tam O'Shanter. Anyway, look at that. I guess because you looked up Tam O'Shanter, and that's what that hat is, of course. But anyway, there's the Tam O'Shanter still there. Talk about a theme park looking building.
Yes, very much so. Oh my goodness!
And what's interesting, you see the more modern building behind it where it says McMahon Stores. When you go in the restaurant, you will find that you'll sort of walk through an archway and into another, obviously slightly newer dining room. It's in that other building. They just cut a hole in it. That's it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And you walk through, and you're really in the entirely separate building, but they just sort of annexed it. Anyway, Tam O'Shanter, or rather Lowry's, the original. Now I think they have one in Vegas, and there's one in Chicago, and other restaurants. And they even actually have one in the South Bay in the mall down there. It's not fancy, but the same prime rib. They even, and I'm not telling anybody to spend any money anywhere, but look around, and they have a deal where they send you a whole meal of the prime rib, the fixings, everything. It's a few $100s, but anyway, you can get Lowry's at home. Well, so that was a hangout, but because it was over there in Glendale next to Griffith Park and near the Hyperion original Disney Studios.
Right.
Anyway, why did we go there? I forget. Oh, you were asking me about great old restaurants from LA. Well, there's that and that. Anyway, there are a lot of good ones. And there's some that survive on their reputation more than their actual stuff. Certainly Wolfgang Puck and in fact, Jose Splichal, or Joachim, I should say, he's Austrian, is all the restaurants at Disney World that he runs. I mean, Space 20, whatever it is.
Yes.
And I forget, how can I think of them? I'm tired, guys. So my brain is faltering on the name of his company, but if I mentioned it, you would know because it's one of the major management companies down there.
Why can't I?
And at downtown Disney in Orange County also.
I can't think of the name. It's his
first restaurant, the one that got him famous, that was over about a block away from Paramount. Well,
Oh, what am I thinking? Okay.
With a P.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. They do the Rainforest Cafe, right? Landry's.
No. Nothing.
No, Landry's.
No. Patina. Yes.
That's the one. The Patina Group, right?
That's it, right,
They
yeah.
are the ones
Not
that do Space
Rainforest.
220. They're the yes. Gotcha. Sorry. It's I'm tired too, Lou.
Well,
Patina Group.
let's see now.
Yeah, and they still do, like you said, Space 220. Couple of things for Disney as well. Obviously, Landry's.
Yeah, and they're now taking over some of those other restaurants there that weren't them originally. Like I see here. Oh no, this is all the way back in 2007, but they took over the Epcot Italy Pavilion, and so they're involved with Morimoto. Let's see, Maria and Enzo's. The Edison is them. They have a restaurant in Boston and Delaware, and they're all over. They're huge. He's a nice guy, by the way. He's a really nice guy. They cater the Emmys just like Wolfgang does the Oscars. Yeah, let's see. I'm looking restaurants. Let's see. Where can I make a reservation on their website tonight? Oh my God.
I know Naples.
Yeah, Nick and Steph's. Penny Vino. Golly. Yeah, quite a few.
Wow.
Anyhow, now you know the rest of the story, as they say.
I guess so. I'm going to try to bring it back here. Actually, we were talking about, let's see, Halloween Horror Nights, and
the stuff we talked about the Dark Universe. What I was saying before this, when we were talking about it, I believe that in a very real way, Dark Universe is a whole different era beginning in theme parks, because we always talk about immersive this and immersive that. And sure, a ride can be immersive. A land, maybe not so much, because as much as it may be dedicated to the living seas or to transportation or to Disney classic Fantasyland characters, it's a bunch of rides or attractions that are in the same category, but they aren't, like Dark Universe seems to be, creating literally a whole place. We had Frankenstein movies. We had Dracula movies. We had Wolfman. We're doing restaurants. I'm back to Wolfgang Puck. But anyway, Wolfman Puck. But this is a town, a nation, a location in a magical world where all these people coincide, and it works. So in the sense that, yes, they're individual attractions, and one's a roller coaster, and one's a makeup show, and they're consistent with each other as far as being in the same place at the same time. And anyway,
and that's it's really the cool thing, because like the Monsters films, the Universal Monsters films, were so revolutionary, because not only did they do sequels, but they also did crossover stuff as well, where you had like Dracula with Frankenstein. That was kind of
not right away.
Era. Not right away, yeah, but later on, as obviously they wanted to milk the cow, so to speak.
Yeah. And I don't want to walk away from this, but back in the chat, I'm noticing people talking about Lowry's seasoning salt and their various. The restaurant company doesn't own that. They licensed it out to the same company that's Lipton Soup. So that's why they get the taco shells and the sauces and all those things. It's all stuff that they started. But anyway, that's the differentiation there.
Favorites. Let's leave them on a good one here, Lou, for the show. By the way, stick around. We're gonna have a little bit of an intermission, just a short intermission, so that we can kind of get refreshed here, and then we're gonna take you to the first about 15 minutes or so of the next show that will actually premiere next week. So making some content for Lou, but also giving you something very original that we've never really done before. So thank you, Jonas, for coming on in that Park Place. Thank you so much. But Lou, I wanted to go ahead and leave them with your favorite Universal monster film.
I think, although it's not my favorite of the monster characters, I think the original Wolfman, because I think of all of them, it gives you the tragedy of this guy being caught up in this thing and being controlled by it. I mean, you could say that about Frankenstein's monster, but that's a dead body reanimated. We don't know anything about the pieces that went into him, if you will. And you could say that about Dracula, but he's, of another world, of another universe, really. But Wolfman is a regular guy who, I remember there was a comedian once who did a spoof of it. And he says, he goes to the gypsy lady and she says, "You have the mark of the werewolf on your hand, my son. You're also an Aquarius." A little free reading for you there. But anyway, he's really a tragic character, and it gives it a poignancy that I think is special. Oh well, somebody mentioned as far as actors, I'm all with you on the Invisible Man. Claude Rains, wow, Claude Rains. And have I mentioned? People think I'm sort of was everywhere and every time, but as a child, Bela Lugosi lived in our neighborhood. And so we would go to the local supermarket and there he would be in the produce section. And I'm going, A, oh my God, that's Dracula. And B, what's he doing buying bananas? He only eats meat, but yeah, that's LA. You grew up next to Dracula. So, but that's yeah, so that would be mine. And it's because, not particularly because of the effects or particularly because of the story in detail, but because that character is such a tragic character, really. And I'm an old softie. Okay, so there's that answer, I guess.
Oh, I like it. I love it. I have a interesting history of the monsters. Loved Van Helsing when that came out. I know, guilty pleasure. I know, I get it. But I think I saw that like 4 times in theaters. Anyway, Look, I was younger, folks. And give me a break. But I just loved the idea of creating a monsterverse like that. So that was a really kind of cool thing that Universal tried to launch. Obviously, they tried to launch the Dark Universe series of films with Johnny Depp and Tom Cruise. No, everything like that. That didn't go very well at all, unfortunately. The Mummy, obviously, in the early 2000s there. Very, very fun. Very, very cool. But of the classics, I think Frankenstein is definitely got to be my favorite, just because Boris Karloff is amazing, and also too, the makeup is phenomenal. And I think I agree with your take, Lou, that the more tortured souls are far more interesting, right? Because we know Dracula. We
not only that, the victims of the monsters, the people that are killed or turned into vampires or whatever, are relatively speaking a dime a dozen. I mean, you feel bad when it's somebody's girlfriend in the story or whatever it is, but they're interchangeable. But the real burden is on the person who is compelled to do it and can't stop and can't break out of it. Somebody who, through no fault of their own, through no deed of their own, is thrown into a horrible, horrible existence. Their life is over,
I agree.
Although maybe this one thing that's driving me nuts about this new land is that that Michael Jackson meets Sgt. Pepper's Band Dracula suit. Maybe he's in a tragedy too.
Yeah, we'll have to see how they do that, because there's some questions there for sure. But love Van Helsing. The cool thing about, I wanted to bring this up real fast, and we'll go to the intermission to get you onto the next show we have here. But what's really cool about the Frankenstein attraction, the main e-ticket attraction for this land, is that it's really Universal kind of coming back onto the idea of making their first Kuka Arm attraction a monsters themed ride. The original idea for the Kuka Arm attraction before Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey was going to be a Van Helsing ride. It was going to feature the monsters that they had created for that film franchise. Unfortunately, that movie didn't do all that well. And once they got J.K. Rowling and she wants to do Harry Potter, well, there you go, right? Natural fit. Yeah. But now it's like, okay, well, we have groundbreaking technology that we didn't have before. We have all these amazing practical effects that we want to utilize this Kuka Arm for. Let's revisit that, but as part of a more maybe coherent or fleshed out universe that harkens back to those original monsters. I think it's so cool. I think this is great, and can't wait because, well, Lou, I mean, you've been going to Universal Hollywood for forever. You know, not only working there but also as a theme park fan.
Oh, I told you, a classmate of mine in school's father invented it.
Yeah. Okay, well,
I mean, you know, he was a lawyer for MCA, and when they bought the studio, they hired a kind of analogous to Bud Price, somebody else, to say, what do we do with it? Do we sell the real estate? Do we keep this? And this guy had somewhere deep down in his report the possibility of a studio tour might be considered. And the father of this friend of mine ran with it, and the rest, as they say,
show business
is Frisco.
But,
no, is England, is really special.
I just love how Universal kind of is leaning into their history and doing it in this really fun, creative way. I think it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. But we will go ahead and leave you guys here. We're going to go ahead, like I said, play a little bit of an intermission. Then we're going to switch gears. I'm going to show you about 15 minutes of kind of behind the scenes, the production of a recorded Hollywood backlot with Lou and you.
And if you were thinking that, like an intermission, you would go out and get more popcorn and whatever, we'll be here for your super chats afterwards.
Yes. Yes.
Super popcorn. We need a super sticker that's popcorn without the bucket.
We will absolutely acknowledge those super chats if you happen to feel generous enough. On the other side, just know though that because I'm gonna extract the video and then put it as a recording. It might not make the edit. If there's a question, well, obviously we'll do that as part of the show. But stick around, guys. We'll be here in just a second.
We're back.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Lou, welcome back.
Thank you. I was just wishing I'd ordered Lowry's at home for this, but see, you get me distracted.
Rib, right?
Yeah, well,
prime rib. I get it. Okay, let me go ahead and do the intro there for the recording there. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you, a standard production like we used to do before, but this one is with a twist right here. This one is actually filmed in front of a live studio audience, at least for the first 15 minutes. So, hey, thank you so much, chat, for joining us here on this very unique presentation of Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. I guess it's fitting, actually, Lou, now that I think about it, because we're all about the backlot. We're all about taking you behind the scenes. We're all about exposing well, I don't know, going behind the camera and seeing what's going on.
Yeah. I've known some people behind the camera that are worth a show all by themselves.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, well, if you guys are watching at home, we talked about the, Universal Monsters as part of Epic Universe's unbelievable debut in the Dark Universe new themed land that they're opening up. But I kind of want to go ahead and take this show in a different direction because I
Good.
think it was now 2 shows ago that I was really inspired by this, and I was like, I kept thinking about it. And I was like, we got to do a show on this. I want to go ahead and take it back to the old West. So we're moving from
My favorite place.
exactly right. We're moving from the European Villager or Courtyard Square, I believe was what it was called, to 6 Points, Texas, as part of the old West. But specifically, I want to eventually get to. Well, obviously, we'll tell the whole history here if we could, but the spaghetti westerns.
Oh, you're talking to the expert,
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. There was a time not that long ago where I was working on a deal to actually build a Western themed, spaghetti Western influenced theme park entertainment. For real, I have the drawings, I have the plans, I have everything. Somehow I didn't have the $25 million we were going to start with, but such is life. But,
Such is life for sure.
25,
So
150, I forget how many. It was a lot of money, but
I'm guessing to tell the proper story of the spaghetti westerns, I guess we have to go back to the original, the inspiration, which was like the classic American Western films.
you have to go to pre-war Italy.
Right.
And what you have to know is that one of the major economic impacts on the movie business and on business in general of that war, whose combatants shall remain semi-nameless, long before we ever got into it, because it was going on for a couple of years before we ever were dragged into it, kicking and screaming. It meant that a lot of our usual commerce, particularly with Europe and certainly with Japan too, was cut off. A big part of any movie's revenue was not just that it played in America and in Canada and in England, but that it played in Italy and Germany and Hungary and all those other places. Well, suddenly there was a war on and that went away. That was bad for business in Hollywood. But it was also bad for the people who used to love American stuff. Particularly in Italy, Westerns were very, very popular. And suddenly they couldn't get any. And so after the war, there was this huge hunger, but nobody ever thought about, well, we should make our own, because it was considered the American art form within the larger movie art form. As it happens, there was this guy named Sergio Leone, and his father was an assistant director and production manager. And after World War II, there was a lot of movie making by American companies in Italy, but it was not Westerns. It was sword and sandal movies, as they call them, the Hercules stuff. And his father was a prominent AD on a lot of those movies. And so he had connections with American producers who shot movies over there. And certainly not just those lower end movies, but, well, look at all of the biblical stuff that Cecil B. DeMille did. Anyway, so he became an assistant director also. And he was looking like everybody else for his big way of breaking in as a director, as a guy in charge. And one day, a buddy of his, who was a screenwriter, called him up and said, hey, there's this movie playing in Rome, and you got to see it. Well, what is it? Well, it's a Japanese movie called Yojimbo. And Yojimbo is the first of the wandering samurai movies that why can't I think of his name all of a sudden?
Kind of like Kurosawa type of films.
Yeah, but the plot was this, what they used to call the lone samurais, because the samurai usually were, the knights of a king or a lord, and there were these guys that were just sort of wandering around, basically guns for hire. Okay, only it was a sword, obviously. And this was a movie where this guy rolls into town, and there's these two competing criminal families, and they hate each other, and they both want to hire him to kind of change the balance of power. So he works for one for a while and kills the other guys, and he works for the other one for a while, and it goes back and forth. Well, if that sounds familiar, that's a fistful of dollars. And that's why his buddy brought him to see it. He said, look, it's Japanese, but what if we did it as a Western? And the little light went on, and he said, wow, but where do we do it? He said, well, how about Spain? It's cheap there. And the terrain down in the south of Spain is very similar to the Old West. And we could do it cheap and get it done. And they put it together, and they did it. There was no such thing as the so-called spaghetti Westerns until that. And one thing you have to understand about Westerns or any other movies in Italy at that time, they're all dubbed. When I say all dubbed, I don't mean they record them in Italian and then somebody comes in and does the voices in English or German. Because Italy was so small as a budget, a market for movies, they couldn't make a real serious profit just showing them in Italy. And so what they used to do was they would hire actors with some prominence in their own country, whether it was Germany or France or America or England, and they'd put them all in the same movie. And when they played that movie, and then they would dub it all afterwards. In fact, on the set, they were literally talking to each other in languages the other guy didn't understand in many cases. But then they would dub them into the various languages. And if you had the biggest star in Sweden in your movie, when it went to Sweden, he got above the title as the star. When it came back to Italy, the Italian guy got above the title as the star. And lots of them, the Italians in particular, but also these people from other countries, would take on American-sounding stage names. And because they hoped if they could get it in England, in America or England, that it would seem more like a real Western rather than this quote-unquote fake Western that they made in Spain. So they made the movie. And then they thought, well, who can we get to be in this movie? And at that time, there was a TV show that was beginning to get syndicated in Italy called Rawhide with a young actor named Clint Eastwood. And they knew that in America, the TV production season ran for a certain number of months, and then there was what was called hiatus, when the people in those shows could take other jobs if they could get them. And so they contacted Eastwood, and they gave him an offer for the hiatus to come over and make this Western in Spain and in Rome. At this studio stuff was in Rome. And it was a very low-budget production. So they said, could you bring some things for your costume or whatever? He brought his guns from Rawhide, knowing nobody would miss them during the off-season. He got the famous poncho. It's a Mexican poncho at a place called the Supply Sergeant, which was a surplus store on Hollywood Boulevard. That and the cheroots that he didn't really smoke, but he wanted them because he thought it would give him the right sort of nasty, bitter look on his face all the time. Talk about method acting. Anyway, he came over to Italy. He made the movie. It was not called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It had a different name when they made it. He got it, got paid, came back to Hollywood, and kept working on the TV show. And one day on the set at Warner Brothers, a friend of his calls him over and says, look at this, and gives him variety that says that there's this Italian Western. And that was why he thought he was being shown it. Isn't that something? They're making Westerns. Because he hadn't told anybody about this low budget piece of nothing. He just did it for the money and came back. And of course, they'd changed the name from what he knew it as, so he didn't realize it was his movie, and it was burning up the box office all over Europe. And he said, wait a minute, I think I made that movie. Okay? So none of this was a planned, organized, it just happened. It just organically came together. And because it was a hit, other directors over there thought, well, gee, we can go to Spain and shoot a movie too. And meanwhile, they called him back for a second one. And because they had come up with that title of A Fistful of Dollars, they said, okay, we'll call the second one a few dollars more. And only when those two movies were done, that summer did they open in America, mostly in drive-ins as double features. And kicked butt, made a fortune. And that's when they said, well, we've got to do a third one. And Sergio wanted him to also get some other Hollywood people in it. And they found this guy who everybody knew his face, but nobody really knew him as a great actor, who was already heading for the motion picture home. He was kind of giving it up, named Lee Van Cleef. And they talked him into doing it. And then they needed one more person, and he really wanted a Hollywood star. and they found a way to reach Eli Wallach, who agreed to do it. And they made The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which opened to much bigger attention. And basically, that's what made Clint Eastwood a star. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, of course, had a even more American theme than just the West, because it's about the Civil War, kind of in a different way about the ending of the Civil War, the way that the movie The Genre Guys just did, The Undefeated with John Wayne and Rock Hudson is. And they made these movies in Spain, partly because of the scenery, but also because Generalissimo Franco had an army for rent. And this movie required a bunch of guys to play Union and Confederate soldiers, and climaxing in this huge scene at a big bridge that they blew up. And why did they want Franco? Because Franco had a bunch of antique weapons. He had old Civil War era Gatling guns and the uniforms. So again, it was a budget thing. But they made the movie. Eastwood has said that he tried to warn Lee Van Cleef and Eli Wallach about the way they did business over there and how it wasn't quite as safe and as careful as in Hollywood. And for that big bridge scene, Leone wanted them to stand in a certain spot, and Eastwood, who knew better by now, said, no. And he marched them back up about 200 yards away. And sure enough, when they blew up the bridge, they would have been killed because the debris would have fallen on that spot that he wanted them in to frame the shot. Eli Wallach also almost got killed. You might remember in Good, Bad, the Ugly, there's a scene where he's handcuffed, and he wants to cut the chain. So he goes to the railroad track, and he's going to put his two manacled wrists with the chain over the track, so when the train goes by, it'll cut the chain. Thing is, that puts his head pretty darn close to the train. And this old Spanish train they got, which in every other respect looked like American Old West trains, had a feature that was common over there, but American trains didn't have. It had kind of like a running board along the edge of the train. So it meant that the corner of the train that was nearest his head stuck out about 10 to 12 inches more than anybody was expecting. And of course, there's no rehearsal. It's lay down here, put it here, it'll be great. Eli Wallach in his memoirs talks about his head was inches away from being hit by this train going 40 miles an hour down the track. So they were all a little rough and ready. Well, by now, everybody was making these spaghetti westerns in Italy on the cheap. B, a lot of American stars were going over to be the figurehead in them. A lot of them actually because remember, westerns were still a big deal on television during their hiatus times. And that's when finally, the studio came to Leone and said, okay, you can make one here and with big stars and for real. And Leone said, oh, that's too bad because I want to do a gangster movie next. I'm not interested in the West anymore. And everything went crazy. And eventually they made a deal where, all right, we'll let you do the gangster movie, but you got to do the Western first, okay? And Leone really wanted a big star. And the one he wanted was Henry Fonda. And thus the beginnings of the most, if you haven't seen it, if you've been scared off by the fact that it's 3 hours long, if you haven't seen the complete movie versus the chopped up, shortened versions they did in America because it was 3 hours long, Once Upon a Time in the West is, as I have said, not only, I think, the greatest of all the Westerns, it is one of the best movies ever made. And it stars Charles Bronson and Claudia Cardinale and Jason Robards, and no, not Clint Eastwood, but Henry Fonda. But how he got into it was a little strange. His wife used to read the scripts that were sent for him to tell him which ones she thought he ought to read and consider doing. And one day she comes running in and she says, Hank, you got to do this one. He says, why? What's so special? And she tells him that in his opening scene in the movie, this group of bad guys in those long dusters that all the people in the Leone Westerns wore rides up on this house where there's a young family. And there's 3 kids and the husband, and they're preparing a big party, a feast, because, as it turns out, his mail-order bride, who's coming to replace the mother who died, is supposed to arrive today on the train from New Orleans. Claudia Cardinale will be that character. the bad guys ride in and they kill them all. I mean, just cold-bloodedly blow their, except the little 10-year-old boy who's standing there just in total shock, who's just seen his father and his two sisters gunned down out of nowhere by these shrouded characters on the hill. And they're all standing there looking at this little kid. And one of the henchmen says, "Well, what are you going to do about the kid, Frank?" And we go up and we see, and he says, "Well, now that you told him my name," and he turns around and there's those baby blue eyes of Hank Fonda's, and he shoots this little boy right between the eyes. And his wife said, theaters all around the world are going to have audiences jumping up screaming, "Holy crap, Henry Fonda just shot that kid!" And from there, the story unfolds. And as I said, it's a movie, not just a Western. It's about the end of the West because it's about the railroad coming. And when the railroad came, law and order came. And when the railroad came, commerce came and politics and all those things that made the West not the West anymore. And it's just the most wonderful movie. Now, the actual opening scene, which you remember I shared with you, is these three guys at this train station in the middle of nowhere. It's this old platform with one little ticket booth with kind of a conductor guy and a squeaky windmill and a dripping pump and bare, worn to the bone timbers that have been sandblasted by the desert for 20 years. And they're all waiting for the train. No music, just the sound effects of this squeaking windmill. And these four guys, or three guys, two of whom are Woody Strode and Jack Elam, old friend of mine, once upon a time. And Jack Elam is sitting there, and there's a fly that's flying around his face, and he grabs it in the barrel of his gun and listens to it. And the train pulls up. They're obviously waiting for somebody coming on that train. And it pulls up, and it takes on water, and it drives away. And they didn't see anybody get off, and they're kind of looking at each other. And as the train pulls away, they see the guy did get off, but on the other side. And he says, "Did Frank send you?" And now we know there's a connection, of course, later. But they say, "No, he sent us." And he looks over and he sees their three horses, and he says, "You're one horse short." And Jack says, "No, we don't need, one too many. You're missing one, and no, you're not, because you're not going anywhere. We're going to kill you." And they look at each other, and this guy is playing a harmonica. And this is Charles Bronson. And his character name in the whole movie is just Harmonica. We don't know what his name is. And everybody pulls their gun, and of course, Bronson kills all of them. And that's how that part of the story begins. And each person in this story are individuals who come together for totally random reasons, but it becomes this huge battle between the railroad and the people that have houses that might be in the way. But that's not what it's about. It's about the internal conflict of people who've been either making a living from or being hurt by the fact that they're out there. They're on the moon as far as the rest of the world is concerned. They're in this total, barren, empty universe, and the train is coming, and it's all going to end. And how can you get as much you can get out of it before it does? Anyway, I went on forever, but I only told a little bit of it. Now, the story of the movie is it was a huge, huge hit, so much so that 2.5 years later, it was still playing at a theater in Paris on the Champs-Élysées. And so Sergio Leone came to see it. They had a little event, and all the fans were there, and everybody was happy, except the projectionist, who came down, looked at him, and said, 2.5 years, and it's 3 hours long, and it's so slow, and punched him in the nose. So the movie had its fans and its rivals. And then, of course, Leone made his gangster movie, which the studio thought gangster movies were dead, just like the trouble that they had making The Godfather for that reason. But anyway, he made that. He kind of directed, but officially didn't, a wonderful comedy spaghetti Western, also about the end of the West, also with Henry Fonda, this time as a good guy, called My Name is Nobody. And you should all see that one because it's a blast. And all of these had the amazing music of Ennio Morricone. And, I remember I have a player piano, and I have I have the player piano roll of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And if you remember that music, there's these people kind of grunting as part of the music. Rip, all this. The words are transliterated on the piano roll where the lyrics normally go on a piano roll. So you can sit at my piano and play along and grunt along with Ennio Morricone, okay? But anyway, and all of these movies became huge. There was but suddenly it made a whole new career for Lee Van Cleef. And he did some, if you want to go see the ones that are Sabata, where there's 3 or 4 of them. And, well, I'm seeing all the chats and I see people know and love these. How much impact did sound have on the fact that they had to dub in a different language, certainly. But by the way, that whole thing of them dubbing movies in Italy, they brought back something with Morricone's music in these movies that hadn't been done since the silence. In the days of the silent movies, when there was no soundtrack being recorded, they'd have a string quartet or a band or somebody, or at least a piano player, on the set to play music just on the fly to give the actors the mood of the scene because it wasn't going to go on the soundtrack. There was none. Well, they did this again. Usually, movie scores are written after the fact. And this one, the main themes for each of the characters, and I didn't mention Robards as Cheyenne, who's another wonderful character in this movie, each of them had their own theme song, just like soundtracks do, but they were playing them on the set so they could get a sense of, the emotion. And somebody's asking another one of Leone's movies, Duck You Sucker, which is a lot of fun. It's not really it's kind of a Western, but it's about Ireland and the Troubles and all of that with James Coburn and Rod Steiger. And yeah, it's a fun movie. And somebody mentions that, yes, Once Upon a Time in the West is restored to 4K and the extras are super. They show you all the places in Spain where they shot the movie and they go from here's what it looks like now compared to what it looked like then. And, where there was a gunfight, there's now a gas station. And where there's, Seven Samurai, which was the source of Magnificent Seven. And Captain John D is mentioning that fly. John D, I don't know if you've heard me mention it before, but Jack told me the way they got that fly to stay with him, honey. They put a little drop of honey on his face and near his jaw where this fly is crawling around because he's stuck there by honey. So anyway, I'm just going on and on here. What do you want to say with this? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? I'm open, No,
I just
there.
love.
I like Westerns. That's probably proof. And of course, there's all the great American Westerns too. But
I love this era. I love this era of just these incredible. I don't know, these really kind of. We talked about subgenres before, but the subgenre of film that came out of Europe, specifically Italy, it's where the name spaghetti western comes from.
But
obviously.
Again, had they not become such huge fans of those movies in the years before the war, because that was America, that was as exotic to them, the Old West in America, as the Tarzan movies were about Africa to American audiences in the 1930s. Just for one example, it's the joy of something different. There's probably only so many ways you can tell a love story, a revenge story, a good guys versus bad guys story. But you put it in an exotic locale that people are not familiar with, and you suddenly imprint on them what that locale is really like, whether you're accurate or not. I remember reading a book years ago that was about, in that conflagration in the 40s, a lot of the prisoners we took in Europe from that country over there that shall remain nameless were put in American POW camps in Arizona and Texas and places like that. And it was a novel about these two Army guys that were in that situation. And they were, oh my God, it's the West. Because in Germany, there was an author named Karl pronounce it May, but M-A-Y, May, who wrote a series. He was the Zane Grey of 1920s, 30s, 40s Germany. And so they were excited that as prisoners, they were going to be in Texas and Arizona. And, my gosh, we'll get to see Indians and we'll get to, and of course, it was nothing like the Old West in those books. And that was interesting to show wish I knew the name of the book, I would recommend it to you all, but I'm sure it's searchable. Everything is. But it was fun because of their misconceptions of how the real West was, especially in the 40s. It's funny, and yet it just shows you the power that literature, even pulp fiction, if you will, can have on people when they're writing about places. Well, the real Tatooine isn't like the one in the movies, you know that. But people think it is because they saw the movie. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but Westerns, they're about taking responsibility for that very reason I mentioned about the fact that there was no real law and order. Right. That you can't wait, you can't call the cops and hope they answer within 911 in 20 minutes or something. You got to do it yourself. And that was a brief, glimmering moment of a few years in our history. And it's part of what makes America America. Let's just leave it like that.
I will absolutely say so. There are so many other things I want to talk about, like Ennio's obviously amazing work and his Oscar win and his was it Paco says Metallica uses ecstasy of gold in their start of their shows. Yes, they absolutely do, and they have for I think like 30 years now, which is really, really cool trivia. We are going to say goodbye to our studio audience right now because, well, we got to give you something to actually tune in for.
Wait, before we do, TWCC 406 is asking, did I get the pictures that he sent to Pro for me? And yes, I did. Thank you very much. They were great. Ooh. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much, guys, for popping on here and joining us for now it's going on 2 hours. I'm gonna spend another about 30 minutes with Lou here in order to finish off again the next show that will be premiering next week. Should be next Sunday, basically. And I also want to go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, I'm probably going to edit this out, but let me see if I can find it here before I let you all go. Let's see here. Yes, I'll show this on screen. Eric Stratton 5653. He sent this 10 days ago. I didn't even see it. I've yet to respond. I'm so sorry, but I want to go ahead and acknowledge it on here. Great work. I wish I could rerun my internal commentary as you were commenting. I am also old, especially memories of being dropped off as a kid. The 2 movie, 1 cartoon deal.
Very cool. I used to love those Charm Pops. It was like a big lollipop version of the little Charms square lifesavers. Mm-hmm. Boy, I had those at every one of those matinees.
Very cool.
Movies were so, but the candy was great. Anyway, thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for super chatting. And thank you so much for your questions. You are the guys that keep this show going for sure. Thank you for tuning in here. And we will we'll see you next week on the other side. When you actually see the show, well, no time has passed, obviously. But for now, take care.